Waxman. Well, I actually just divorced the husband.
Oh.
28 years. Still very patient, but we're still good friends. That's good. It's happy. But I have to change that often. But I can just say one very patient ex-husband. So I'm going to start. I'm going to read through the first chapter of the book.
Okay.
And there's a little setup. All you need to know is that prior to the book beginning, about 25 years prior, the main Christa's father disappeared in a plane crash, presumed lost, and he was a TV naturalist, like Crocodile Hunter, Bear Grylls, that kind of thing. And so he's been missing, presumed dead, for 25 years before the book begins. Chapter 1. So, I'm going to kick off by making one thing very clear. None of this was my fault. I was part of it, sure, but only like a flea is part of a cat. I was carried along, contributing my own pain in the arse factor, no argument there, but I was not in any sense driving the bus. Let's not forget that when this story starts, I was literally on an island in the middle of nowhere. Hands full, head busy, heart well guarded. Safe as houses, baby. Wait, that's not completely accurate. The island of Violetta isn't in the middle of nowhere. It's slightly to the right of Africa, many hundreds of miles into the Indian Ocean. It's a geographical, political, and sociological anomaly. It's also home to a frozen vodka drink called the Barrier Island, beyond which no man may safely travel. But that's a side note. It lies 2 days' sail from a large French-speaking island more than 500 miles off the East African coast, which is probably why the French didn't bother to claim it. It was ignored by the Mauritians because they thought the French already nabbed it, and blithely disregarded by the British, who had no idea who owned it but had no reason to think it was them. No one paid much attention to it at all until the 1950s, when an enterprising young Violetan by the name of Agnes Bottlebrush did a school project on the even younger United Nations, and then quietly applied for membership for Violetta. Agnes was an overachiever, with time on her hands. As the result of a series of fortunate and slightly comedic events, Violetta became the smallest member of the United Nations, and Agnes received a rapid promotion to head girl. Then she walked around to everyone's houses and handed them a copy of the UN Charter and gathered suggestions for what to put on the flag. The capital of Violetta, such as it is also called Violetta and has a population of around 2,000, of which several hundred are visiting scientists of all kinds. Why, you may ask, are so many drawn so far for so little? Well, it all goes back to the island's anomalous nature and fortuitous location. Geographically, the island is too far from the coast to be readily reached by casual travelers, too inhospitable to be easily settled, and too daunting from a distance, cliffs on most sides and a whacking great volcano in the middle. This peaceful lack of interruption for millennia gave rise to flora and fauna that aren't seen anywhere else, which in modern times brings a steady stream of scientists to the yard. On this particular day, the sun was a high, creamy disk in the cornflower sky. Oh wait, sorry, skipped. At any given, because I do this and I edit so that it's not too long, and then I confuse myself. At any given moment, half the population of the island is enrolled in some kind of scientific study, and the other half is taking a rest and refusing to fill out any more pigging questionnaires. Agnes Bottlebrush had a lot to answer for. However, if you're going to be invaded by a small army, it's much better to get an army dedicated to protecting and maintaining your ecosystem, rather than pillaging your natural resources, destroying your culture, and pointing out your inadequacies. On this particular day, the sun was a high, creamy disk in the cornflower sky as I was pottering around in my boat doing science. The boat was loosely tethered about 30 feet out so I could take shore water samples, and I was leaning over the edge and scooping while breathing somewhat heavily. I'm not a very big person, and I basically needed to hinge over the edge of the boat to reach the water. It may have been ungainly, but I wasn't expecting company, so when pebbles started hitting me in the arse, I was pretty quick to turn around. A little kid was hopping about on the shore. Not only was he lobbing pebbles, he was also clearly trying to convey something important, because his lips were making a series of wide, round shapes. As I was listening to 90 hits at a pretty decent volume, I couldn't hear a word. I yanked out my earbuds and held up my hand. "Simon, stop, I had my music on." I shook my earbuds like sad mini castanets, but Simon, who is the 10-year-old son of my landlady, kept hopping and yelling. Either he thought he had the voice of a god, or I had the ears of a bat, possibly both. I scrambled around and started hand-over-handing the anchor rope, hauling closer to shore. It was only once I was much, much closer that I could make out even a single sentence. Unfortunately, the sentence I heard was, "Smash it with a hammer," which probably wasn't the best entry point. "Mom says your phone keeps ringing," he said, which did explain the haste. Simon's mum Miranda runs the best boarding house on the island. Her cooking is legendary, and I've gained both weight and inner peace under the influence of her sauces, But so are her temper and caprice. Noise isn't tolerated. Contracts are verbal and non-binding. And I swallowed, because now I was in trouble and Miranda scared the applesauce out of me. Is she mad? I asked. Simon shrugged. She said to tell you it's rung 7 times, and if it rings again, she's going to smash it with a hammer. This was obviously a quote, and he tried to soften it with a smile. You know, for her, not so mad. I said, let's hurry. My landlady was sitting outside her house as usual, drinking iced tea and gossiping with her sister, who owned another boarding house across the street. They looked up and watched me coming toward them, doing everything I could to express my regret and apology from the minute they laid eyes on me. I crouched a little, I raised my shoulders, I held up both my hands, and I essentially sprinted up the street with a triumphant Simon trotting behind like a greyhound with the rabbit in its teeth. The best approach with Miranda was extensive flattery, a mutual but unspoken agreement that the fault always lay with the tenant, and simple staying power. I was her oldest tenant in terms of time served, so I had a little leeway. It's still ringing, she said, with probably mock ferocity. She narrowed her eyes, which missed nothing. Take it with you or turn it off, I don't care which. I nodded apologetically and sped past her to go up to my room. She added, don't make me move you. I screeched to a halt, literally raising a tiny cloud of dust, and backed up. Please don't, I said. I promise it won't happen again. Distantly, but clearly, the damnable phone started ringing again. Miranda slowly started raising her eyebrows, which is the beginning of an expression most tenants only get to see once, so I booked it up the stairs 2 or 3 at a time. I heard her laughing with her sister, so hopefully that means she won't gut me like a fish later on. I finally had the best room in the place, and it's taken me all 4 years to get it. With great power, as you know, usually comes great responsibility, but Miranda has great power and a total disinterest in being responsible for anything. When tenants come to the end of their research, or they ran out of funding, whichever happens first, they were responsible for finding a new tenant for their room. Miranda's ideal tenant was one who paid the rent on time and came to her on their last day and said, thanks for everything. This is Professor Binglebangle. She's a geologist. She'll be taking over my room. People already living in the house got priority, which means people are nice to their housemates and offer blandishments and sometimes outright bribes to get better rooms. In the course of my 4 years on the island, I charmed my way up to the top floor, and earlier this year had only 1 move left before I reached room 12, my ultimate dream destination. I visited someone in that room in my first week or 2 and decided on the spot it would be mine because I love an objective. It has a balcony bigger than the room itself, with 2 sets of arched French doors onto it, and a view of the volcano that means that you'll be the first to know if the world is about to end. The sun fills the room, you can hear the ocean, it has 2 ceiling fans and yellow shutters, and is my favorite place in the whole world. As luck would have it, a week or so after I attained the top floor, the tenant of room 12, an easily distracted entomologist from Leiden University, somehow let his study subjects escape, and the whole house had to be fumigated. I have no idea how it happened. But one plausible theory is he left a lid open one time when his door was unlocked. I helped pack up all the food before the fumigators arrived and was rewarded with his room. However, the stairs up were no joke, and I was seeing stars by the time I flung the door open and started hunting to the phone, which of course stopped ringing the minute I put my hand on it. Damn it. I looked at it. 12 missed calls in the last 2 hours, all of them from my mother. My mum being the force of nature she was, it could be about literally anything, but it was unlikely to be good if it mattered this much. I flicked to messages and saw I had numerous texts from her and both my sisters. Every text from all 3 of them said, call me, which is honestly the most annoying text in the history of communication. Tell me more, and maybe I will, but order me to call you, and my answer is going to be, make me. Besides, deductive reasoning indicated we were looking at some kind of family-wide issue, which meant I was now fighting the impulse to throw the phone out the window and hide under bed. There was simply no way everybody needing to talk to me at once could be anything but bad news. I glanced up from the phone screen and caught sight of myself in the mirror. With thoughts of my mother in my head, I straightened up and took a look. As always, I was wearing pieces from what she refers to as my forest floor collection. It makes my life easier to wear khaki, green, olive, or sand, because all of my clothes end up coated with seawater, salt lines, and general beach muck. I researched and found the perfect pair of shorts. I researched and found the softest, most durable t-shirt, then bought 4 sets of both and never wear anything else. Honestly, when Einstein did it, he was an eccentric genius. When Steve Jobs did it, he was a genius emulating an eccentric. And when I do it, I'm not making enough of an effort. I took a deep breath and was about to hit call back when the phone rang again. I sat on the edge of the bed just in case and answered. Thank God, said my mum. I hope you're sitting down. No hello, no how are you, no nothing, just straight into a warning. I knew it. Yes, I'm sitting down. Mum took a deep breath. They found your father. My mouth literally fell open. I felt a rush of overwhelming emotion I couldn't identify, and when I said, well, I was whispering. I couldn't get enough air for volume. Alaska, replied Mum, but that's not the surprising part. Thank God I was sitting down. What's the surprising part? There was a hesitation as if my mother couldn't quite believe it herself. he's alive. Plot twist.
So if that doesn't make you want to buy it. All right, so we're going to be doing kind of like a moderate conversation at the end. There will be some room for some Q&A from all of you guys. And our first question is, let's begin with your background. How did you get into writing, and what inspired you to write your first book?
So, genetics. So my mother was a writer, and so growing, she writes murder mysteries. So she's retired now, but she wrote murder mysteries. And so when I was growing up, I thought that's what mothers did. I thought that's what grown-ups did. And she would drop us at school. She would go into her office. There would be clouds of cigarette smoke coming out from under the door. And then at the end of the day, she would emerge and make dinner. And so I thought that's what you did when you had kids. That was the thing. And I always wrote stories and poems and things like that.
So sorry.
No, that's quite all right. I'm so glad you were able to make it. And so I always wrote, and left to my own devices, that's what I do with my time. Like if you leave me alone in an empty room, eventually I will start writing something. And so I knew that was what I wanted to do. And so I went into advertising as a career. That was what my father did. And it seemed like a good idea. Like I could write for a living, but actually make a living, and wear jeans and sweat and drink at lunchtime. So that's what I did for many years. And then when I was about to have start a family, I had a little ad agency that I ran myself at the time, and I shut the agency and started writing books. And I had this idea that I would write while the baby slept, which is completely ridiculous. But it doesn't work at all. So the first book took me like 5 years to write, because the baby was there, and the second baby, and then the third baby. So they were everywhere. They get in the way.
Your latest novel, Christa Comes Out of Her Shell, was just released on April 16th. Congratulations, first of all. As you heard in the first chapter, it's about a scientist that studies snails in the Indian Ocean, Christa, who suddenly finds out that her once famous father, long thought dead after a plane crash, is actually alive. What inspired you to write this book?
I always start with the character. And so the character of Christa, I was interested in writing someone who was really sort of misanthropic, who had through her life experiences, had just come to not trust people and not be interested in people at all. And so had chosen to seclude herself away. And then, of course, I needed something to force her out of hiding. And I just thought it was the most ridiculous thing that could possibly happen. And at the time, people had thought they had found Amelia Earhart's plane. This was a couple of years ago when I started. And they were like, oh, we think we found the plane. And I was like, what would that be like, if it turned out that actually she's been hiding out this whole time? I mean, she'd be extremely elderly at this point, Miss Earhart. But I mean, no, if ever Elvis shows up, or what would happen? And what would happen is that the media world that we live in today would just go berserk, right? It would be insane. And so I'm like, okay, so I'm going to force this poor girl out of hiding, and I'm going to make something happen that just completely bathes her in the spotlight, and there's no way for her to escape. And then I'm also interested in celebrity generally, I'm not interested in celebrities per se, but I'm interested in the way that we think we know them. And there's this sort of false intimacy that is created by celebrity, where you think, oh, they're just like us. They shop at the grocery store. They're just like us. They get divorced. They're just like them. But we don't know them at all. And in the case of actors, we only know the people that they're pretending to be. We don't even know who they are as people. We see them working, right? And so I find that very interesting. And living in Los Angeles, you see celebrities all over the place doing regular stuff. And you're like, oh, there's X, who I know has 3 kids and, likes cheese and, had a really hard time with drugs 4 years ago. And you think you know who they are, but you don't know them at all. And so I was interested in what that would feel like from that point of view, that when you meet someone, they already know much, much more about you than you know about them. And they think that makes them an expert on you, but you don't really know. So, and for me, novels exist in the gap between the outside and the inside. somebody, like the way that we portray ourselves publicly and then the way we are privately, that space is where novels exist, to me. So celebrity is just sort of a very heightened version of that. So that's what I wanted to do. And then I wanted to write about family, because I always write about family. So
family is a common theme that you have in this book, but also in some of your previous books. Why is this a theme that you tend to return to in your writing, and what other themes do you also tend to incorporate into your writing?
I write about family because I think it's the most interesting thing about our life, right? It's the way that we interact with other people. And the people that we're forced to interact with is most interesting, right? And I'm interested in the way that your relationship with your family changes as you age. And being a parent myself and being a child of a parent myself, those relationships are constantly in flux, right? They're constantly changing. And yet we remain sort of stuck, like fossilized in amber in the relationships that we have, with our parents. So I see my mum and I'm immediately 14 and stroppy again. Doesn't matter what good mood I am when I walk in. I'm just like, well, you're going to tell me what to do. And with my own kids, I have 3 now, mostly grown, 22, 20, and 17. They're always going to be little to me. And you have to work hard to acknowledge and accept that they are now adults and that they have their own opinions, which they do not hesitate to express. But I think that's the work of life, is to constantly change and grow the nature of your relationships with other people, to me. So I find it really interesting. And this book in particular is a lot about how, because Christa sort of became forced to be a little bit of a celebrity after her father disappeared, because her mum took over the sort of TV naturalist role and would go on TV shows like Jack Hanna, like here's a baby bear and here's a spider in a box or whatever. And she would take Christa with her, because Christa was quite small at the time. She doesn't know her father at all. She was maybe 2 or 3. So she became this cute little, sort of addendum so she was dragged into fame. And then in her teen years had sort of a very public Lindsay Lohan-esque falling apart with drink and drugs. And everybody watched that happen. And so everybody thinks that they know the story of Christa. They think they know who she is and what she's like. So now she's been hiding away for a decade, and she comes back and everybody still sees her that way. And so her journey in the book is to get to a place where she trusts that people can actually see her as she really is, that she can be who she really is in the world with other people. So, yeah, it's fun. And then other themes I return to, there's always a dog and a cat. There's always, there's always pets in the books. There's always romance, some kind of romance. There's a love story in this one.
Since Christa is a scientist, there are several scientific facts that are weaved throughout the book. What was your research like in regards to that for the novel, and also your research for Christa's character?
Well, the science part was really fun, because I'm obsessed with snails. I've always been obsessed with snails. They're my favorite. I have a snail tattoo on my wrist. So that was easy. Like when I decided she was going to be a scientist, deciding what she was going to study was a piece of cake. It was that or cats, right? So so I got to do lots of research, which I'm always happy to do because it means you don't have to do any work. So, I'm like digging into, and I found that there's a woman who wrote a huge important paper about violet sea snails, which is the snails that she studies, who are, side digression, incredibly interesting. And they're little, and they're about this size, and they float around on the surface of the ocean. They have no method of propulsion themselves, so they make little boats out of their own mucus, little snot rafts, and they attach themselves to these little collection of bubbles, which become sort of solid on the surface of the water, so they look like foam, and they just float around wherever the current takes them, just eating whatever happens to drift by, which is such a bizarre adaptation, like such an interesting, how did that happen, right? Like evolutionarily, like that was, well, the first snail was like, achoo, and then suddenly it was like, shit, I'm floating. And then from that it developed, right? So I don't know, I have an anthropology degree, so that's what's interesting to me. That's people, and people don't float around on the water propelled by snot, but you get my point. So so that was really fun, and any excuse. And then, because she's a scientist, she sees everything through that lens. So she's constantly throwing little factoids and little science asides and observations into the book because that's the way she sees the world. That's how she looks at the world. An artist maybe would see beauty and color in painting, and she sees animals and plants and things like that. So there are factoids and footnotes and illustrations throughout the book. And in fact, the little illustrations were done by my eldest daughter, who is an illustrator. So yeah, she did this for me too.
How important is setting to you in a book?
It must be really important because all of my books are set in the same place. So the first 5 books were all set in the neighborhood I live in, Larchmont, in LA. I nearly said New York, strangely, but it's not. It's Los Angeles. And then this one I went further afield. I went to the other side of the freeway to Venice Beach and Santa Monica, which I try not to go to personally because it's too far from where I live. But I think setting is important. It's not as important to me as the characters are. But I think characters are affected so strongly by their environment that, Christa spends most of the book trying desperately to get back to her island. That's her happy place. It's where she feels the most comfortable in her home. And so the push-pull in the book is her. She's very attracted to this guy who's like a childhood friend, and she arrives back and he's there and she's like, oh my God. And he's like, oh my God. And they're like, and then, but at the same time, she's like, I got to get out of here. I got to get back to my island and hide. So that's the small tension, but it's a tension.
Your novels have a unique and witty humor in them. How do you infuse that humor into your writing about the deeper topics?
Being stage. I don't know. I can't take anything really seriously. Like even the most serious topics eventually make me giggle. So. There are some serious in all the books. Like the first book is about a widow. The second book is about a marital affair that blows up a neighborhood. The third book is about someone with crippling social anxiety. Fourth book, I don't remember. But the fourth book was about a mother and daughter going on a school tour and the tension between a mother and a teenage girl, which is obviously was living through it at the time. So that was like a catharsis to writing that book. The fifth one is about someone dealing with post-traumatic stress, but the thing is, I think we all deal with stuff like this. We all have something to carry. We all have something that is heavy, but we get through it by being light and having other people be light about it with us. And so again, it's about the space between the outside and the inside. And so you might appear to be fully confident and on top of your game, but on the inside be crippled with social anxiety. And the novel lies in that space, in the difference between those two things. So, I don't know. I just find most things funny, and that's, I guess, my defense mechanism. So that's what I grew up learning to be defensive. And I'm British, and we're all like that. That's just the way it goes.
During a book or a series, characters tend to change. How have you changed during your writing career?
That's a good question. Personally, over the last, I guess it's been 9 years since I started writing. My kids have grown up, so I've felt myself changing from being primarily a mother who writes to primarily a writer who mothers occasionally. So that's been an interesting change. My marriage fell apart and I got divorced in a very nice and gentle sort of way, but still. And I have tried to become more less sort of stoic in the face of life and more vulnerable. That's sort of the things that I work on. And then professionally, it's gotten harder and harder and harder. Like it's much harder I would love to say that each book is easier to write, but it is not the case. Each book is exactly as hard to write as the previous one. And you would think that you would get better at it, and because there are some aspects that you get better at. Like I'm quicker with edits, I'm better at taking criticism, I'm better at working out how sort of artisanally to move one section of the book to another and change the structure and do all of that. Like the technical stuff has become easier, but the actual sort of making up of the words part is just as hard as it always was, and sometimes just as easy as it always was. It's really not, it's not like I'm ice fishing in the Arctic, right? I'm not heavy lifting, or like I'm not a child soldier or anything. It's like, it's a pretty easy job at very low stress and very low dress requirements. And the health plan is pretty good, like I'm mostly sitting. But it's still hard, you know, and there comes my process is basically I get all excited and like I'm full of beans and I'm like, this is going to be the best book I've ever written. I'm going to finally say whatever it is I'm on the planet to say. Whatever bullshit thing I'm telling myself at the time. And I write really fast for like 10,000 words and then I completely panic and like freak out and I have no idea what I'm going to do next. I have no idea what I'm going to say. This is the worst thing I've ever written. It's terrible. And then I get a load of note cards and I stick them on a board and I work out what could happen. And then I write from where I am to there. And then I panic again. And then I just do that over and over again until the book is done. And that's my process. So it's not a very good process. And I don't recommend it. But that's what works for me. So, that's how I've changed. How have I changed? Insufficiently.
Do you have a favorite or a least favorite character that you've written?
I don't have a least favorite. I like most of them. There's a character in Other People's Houses, which is the second book, about a woman who has an affair and blows up her neighborhood. The woman who has an affair, I don't like her very much. Not because she had an affair, but because she remains kind of unwilling to look at herself, even by the end of the book. But it's not her book. She's not the main protagonist in the book. The main protagonist has all kinds of growth. But this chick is just kind of shallow and superficial, so I like her the least. But so maybe one day I have to go back and like fix, like write her a story so she can grow, because otherwise she's stuck there and that's not fair. But and then my favorite characters are always the cat or the dog. Frank the dog in Garden of Small Beginnings is probably my favorite character. I just love to write the inner thoughts of animals. It just makes me happy because I don't actually know what they're thinking, but I like to think that I do. So yeah.
Last question, what is next for you?
What's next for me is I'm beside myself with excitement. So what's next for me is I'm switching genres and I'm starting to write mysteries. So next year my first mystery comes out. It's done. I'm on final edits with it now, and then they bought another one. So there will be 2 mysteries coming out in the next 2 years, and I'm really it's my favorite genre to read. It's my favorite genre period, and so I'm hoping that I'm good enough at it that people like them and that it takes off and that I can just write these 2 detectives for the rest of my life, and then I'll do an occasional rom-com as well, because I'm sure someone will complain. But yeah, and so it's an old lady, which is not old, but she's in her like mid to late 60s, and a young woman in her early 20s, and they team up. They're both recovering alcoholics, and they meet in a meeting, and they team up to solve the crime of why there is a dead body floating in the older one's pool. So then they form a little pairing, and they will continue to solve mysteries, I hope, if people like the books, and I will get to write more of them. But yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
All right, well, thank you very much. Does anyone have questions, something like that?
You can go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Waxman, you had a character in the book, Sarah Pepperdine. You said she's not a doofus.
No, she's not.
And I'm assuming you named her after the college
I did.
in Malibu?
I did, yeah.
And then the one thing
It's a little bit of a subtle insult.
and the one thing you mentioned in there, that she wore Balenciaga sneakers. What are they?
They're like ridiculous sneakers that cost like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And,
Okay.
And I always struggle a little bit, not to judge, but I always struggle a little bit with people who spend like thousands of dollars on sneakers, or shoes in general, actually. But that's just me. I mean, each to his own, and you do you.
Okay.
But
But that's a high-end sneaker.
It's a super high-end sneaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And ugly. A super high-end, extremely ugly sneaker.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you.
You should Google it.
I was caught off guard with that, I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, you can Google it. You'll see. They're really repulsive.
Okay, all right.
I think your friends got Steve.
Okay.
Because I'm a runner.
Okay, now that's
so
Joe.
expensive.
Let me retrench. Like, if you're actually an athlete and you're buying equipment, that's totally different.
Okay.
Then you could just spend your life's earnings on that and knock yourself out. But these are really ugly. And she couldn't have run for a bus in them. You know, they're really bulbous. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, I'm trying to be supportive, encouraging my adult son who's writing. He's got some editors, and can you speak to like who was your support system around, and was difficult to get your first novel out there, and like what was that process? Any recommendations or suggestions or?
Sure. Yes, it's hard. And the first thing that you need, first of all, you need to finish the book, right? So the first piece of advice I give someone who wants to write is just write like every day and never quit, like just never quit. However, it's easily said, right? And not easily done. And once you've got the book, you need to get an agent, because it's almost impossible to get a book published. Although you can, these days it's very different, because these days you can self-publish a book and it's an entirely reasonable thing to do. Like it used to be something that was sort of thought of as like a vanity press, that you basically pay to have your book published. That's not the case anymore with Amazon, and like, I think there are a couple of others as well. Like that's a completely legitimate choice. So if your son finishes a book and he's had lots of people read it, like at least 6 people should read it and like it, and not 6 people who know you, but 6 people who don't care, then he could go that route, and there have been notable successes of people who originally self-publish a book and then it becomes huge. 50 Shades of Grey being a classic, though somewhat pornographic example. Pornography always does pretty well, so regardless of how it gets there. But there's nothing wrong with doing that anymore. And then sometimes a good piece of advice is that you should assume that your first book is crap. Like I wrote 3 novels before I wrote the one that got published, and each one was crap, but slightly less crap than the previous one. Because sometimes you have to get the crappy ideas out before you get enough practice to write a good idea. But if he has an idea that just won't shut up, and he has an idea that he really needs, a story he really needs to tell, then he should absolutely 100% never give up until it's done. Because ultimately at the end of the day, what's important is getting it out, whether it gets published or not, right? Yeah, so don't quit and get an agent.
Yes.
What's it? No. Oh, sorry, just to finish the question. So agents often will publicly announce periods of time when they are accepting submissions. So the practical thing to do is find out who is publishing the books that you like, right? So identify which publishers are publishing the kind of books that you're writing, like specifically. So if you're writing science fiction with aliens and cats, then try and find a book that's similar to that and who publishes it. So there's your identify your publisher. Then identify which writers are writing like you and who their agents are, and then you've identified which agents you want. Then go online and find out if they have open submission periods, and some do. And they will all publish on their own website submission guidelines, and they're very specific, like send a query and the first chapter, or don't query me unless you have a whole book, or don't query me unless you have X, Y, or Z. So there's a lot more information online than there used to be. It was, even when I submitted, it was like the first time I sent out like 100 copies, like 100 different agents, got absolutely nowhere. And in the end, it was a friend who introduced me to a friend who introduced me to an agent. So then I got lucky. But there's a lot of work that he can do to make things easier for himself. You're welcome.
Are you a get up at 5 a.m. writer, or what is your schedule?
I am a get up at 5 a.m. writer. I get up every morning, actually, yes, 5 a.m., which is kind of a cheeky question. But I get up at 5 a.m. I'm a sober alcoholic, so the first thing I do is I go to an AA meeting every morning, and then I start working. And when I'm working on a book, I tend to work for like 3 or 4 hours, take a break, fart around, gaze at the wall, whatever. And then I go pick up my kid from school, and sometimes I'll do a second shift in the evening. If I'm on a deadline, I'll work then from like 7 till 10 at night as well. But yeah, that's what. And then the rest of the time I procrastinate and don't do it and feel bad about myself.
Miss Waxman, do you write with pencil or do you?
No, laptop.
Laptop?
Laptop all the way. In Microsoft Word, I don't even use there's new software now that novelists love called Scrivener that people are obsessed with. I'm too, now I can't, I'm just still Microsoft Word, which is still how to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Since your mom was a writer, did she like teach you anything about like being an outwardist?
No, she didn't teach me anything, but she showed me. But she just never quit. She just worked every day, and so it just became like the thing that you do. Like it was not. I think kids see they follow what they see, right? I think if I'd grown up in LA, I would have written screenplays because that's what I would have seen. But I saw, because I like dialogue and I like movies, and I think that would have been probably a really fun career that I may or may not have been any good at, but it would have been what I would try. But she just showed me that you don't give up. And I remember her getting her first book published. I was about 7 or 8, and she went running across the street to her best friend's house, like waving the letter, because back in the day it was a letter. And then I just watched her never stop. You know, she just was always working on something, and she took it seriously. So it never crossed my mind to not take it seriously. You know, even though I always felt a little uncomfortable saying, what do you do? I'm a writer. And I would always feel a little bit ashamed of that until I actually had a book published, and then I was like, no, I actually am. Like, but even to this day, it still makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I'm still a little bit like,
So I just got an additional question. What was your mother's pen name? And
she was Paula Gosling, and she published 15 books in her time. She won awards. She was good. She was really good. Yeah, she's out of print now mostly, but someone just optioned her first book, which was called A Running Duck, and published as Fair Game in this country. And they made Cobra. I don't know if you remember the Sylvester Stallone movie Cobra. So Cobra's based on that book, and also which is a truly terrible movie. And and then another terrible movie called Fair Game with Cindy Crawford and Stephen Baldwin, also terrible movie, based on the same book. And someone just optioned it again to remake, and it was written in 1977. It's like the book that just will not die, and which is great because I'm suddenly like, great, I'm not going to have to pay to put my mother in an old people's home. She'll have her own money. But not that I would do that to her. But what's weird about it is that the thing of the book is simply that a woman sees an assassin on his way back from killing someone, so she's the only person who's ever seen his face, and so he goes after her. I think that's not that's not unique. That's a trope. That's not, you know. So my mother is always mystified as to why this keeps happening. But okay, you know, like sure. But that's yeah. And when they made Cobra, it was a motorcycle-wielding gang with axes, and there's nothing like that in the book at all. It wasn't even really matter.
I like that movie.
Oh, it's a great movie. No, I mean, if you want a movie about, if you watch one movie this year about a crazy motorcycle axe-wielding gang, make it that one. Yeah, it's good. It's got Brigitte Nielsen in it.
That
I just want to ask you, you were influenced by your mother. Were there any authors you were inspired by in the science store?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly read mysteries growing up, and my choice what I'm going to read on my own left of my own device is always Golden Age mystery writers. Agatha Christie, obviously, Patricia Wentworth, Nia Marsh, Dorothy Sayers, like all of those Rex Stout, American Nero Wolfe mysteries. Like that period of time was just the writing was so crisp and the plots were so tight and the characters were so good, and I still read. I'm always reading at least one Agatha Christie at all time. Like she's just the best.
And you said that did you write every day? You know how they have mentioned about some authors and writers. So did you write every day? I mean, it's not easy to write every day.
Yeah, no, and I don't write every day. Like I want to write every day, and I sit down and try every day, but I often fail. Often, terribly, and there will be periods where I just have no idea what I'm supposed to say, and then I will sometimes play around with my note cards on a board instead of writing. You know, or I'll try and think about a scene that I could write later on. And then other times I just lie around and weep.
You did a good job. Congratulations to you on you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you ever work on 2 things at once? Like I paint, and sometimes I'll have 2 things going.
Yeah,
You
sometimes.
know, it helps.
Yeah,
Creative process.
sometimes. For me, sometimes that just means I half-ass 2 things simultaneously. So, but I like to think that I can, you know, And sometimes I will, like I'll work on a short story. I've written a couple of short stories that I give away for free on my website at Christmas. And so sometimes I'll work on a short story about the same characters that I'm working on. No, I can procrastinate. Dude, I can do almost anything to avoid writing. Like, I will clean even if I have to. It's like, so when I get writer's block, which I get quite a lot, I just tend to just give up pretty easily. Like, I'm just pathetic. I'll be like, well, this isn't coming, so I'll go do something else. You got so much of it. I'm a lover, not a fighter. That. But yeah.
You said your first 3 books were crap. Did you go back and fix them, or did you just say, no, flushed?
No, I mined them. I harvested them for parts. So, yeah, the first one that I ever wrote is lost because I typed it on the typewriter. It's like, it's lost which is from as well. And the second 2 had bits that were good, and so I would go back and take bits. And I still do occasionally. I'll be like, I'll remember that there was a scene, and then I'll manage to waste like 3 or 4 hours looking through old hard drives trying to find it. It's a great time waster. And then I'll get there and I'll find that it's literally 1 sentence that I like, and I could have just written it from memory. But I broke them apart. Parts. Yeah. Nothing never dies. I keep everything that I write, and I have like a million starts. I have a load of like 10,000 word starts where I'm like, this is going to be a book, and I write 10,000 words, and I'm like, it's not going to be a book. It's not anything. But I'll keep it because you never know when you might need it or when it will inspire something else. So I don't throw anything away.
So everything you write, you keep.
I keep, yeah. I have a detailed.
Then you'll pull in like for vocabulary, so you'll think.
Just whatever, yeah. I mean, nothing is wasted, right? Everything that I write, I keep for something. It might show up in a short story sometime. It might show up, It's just also if I don't write it down, I'll forget it. So I just keep everything in folders on the desktop. Deep folders.
Thank you.
What, if anything, is the role of other writers around you, or editors, or friends who are doing similar or different work?
It's changed over time. I live in a neighborhood that's stuffed with writers. There's a lot of TV writers and a couple of other novelists and screenwriters, and mostly their role is we just sit around and whine, to commiserate with each other and complain about editors or agents or our singular lack of success or whatever. So mostly it's emotional support, and sometimes we'll blurb each other's books, we'll write reviews for each other and stuff like that. But mostly it's just emotional support. Yeah, I like other writers, but I've never been part of a writers group or like a workshop-y sort of. I just never did that. I just never did.
What would be your favorite character that as you continued to write and you just fell in love with writing the character, a villain or a good person or a side person?
The detectives that I'm writing, the older woman, her name is Julia Mann, and she's just a martinet. Like, she is just so pissy and cranky all the time and just really like fires from the hip, and I love her. I just love her, and I love writing her and the younger girl, the way they interact with each other. Like, there's a lot of sort of back and forth, and they hate each other, but they love each other, and it's, the standard kind of thing. And that's why I'm really hopeful that the mysteries take off, because I would love to write those characters every day. Like, she just makes me laugh every time. So she's my favorite. It's cranky old lady. Yeah.
Is it possible she's your role model for your future life?
Yeah, I would love to grow up to be I'm pretty old already, but I would love to grow up and be as cranky and individual as she is. Like, she just takes no prisoners. She takes no shit from anyone. She's fearless. She's been to jail. She's lived a multiplicity of lives in her life, and I admire her greatly. I have to like the characters. I'm really bad at villains. Like, there have been complaints that my books are full of nice people, to which I say, go read someone else. Because if I don't like someone, I can't be empathetic, and I can't write about them, and I can't want good things for them. So, yeah, I write chirpy, good-natured books where nobody's a complete asshole. I mean, there've been some difficult characters, but everybody has something to recommend them, I think. So, yeah, there's lots of bad-tempered villains out there, but other people have written that they do a much better job than I do. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, besides like the mystery novel, like Agatha Christie, and then any other, fiction work that explores your heart?
My favorite writer, I have a couple of very, very favorite writers, but my favorite writer is P.G. Wodehouse, who wrote the Jeeves and Wooster novels. He's incredibly funny, and he wrote all through the 20th century, but he writes that his stuff is set in the 1920s in England, and there's sort of this rich sort of idiot and his butler, Jeeves, solves all the problems that Bertie has. And his fluidity with the English language and the way that the way he writes a sentence or creates a paragraph, I think is just flawless. And so I'm always going back to him over and over and over again.
What's his name?
P.G. Wodehouse.
Okay.
Spelt Wodehouse, W-O-D-E House.
Okay.
And John Mortimer?
I actually have never read John Mortimer.
Oh,
I know.
ooh.
People are like, oh, you would love John Mortimer. And I'm like, would I?
You
All
will.
right. Yes, but I will. Yes, I will. I'm always looking for news. I read all the time. And
I reread them even.
Okay.
You know,
I'm like that with Rex
I read
Stout.
all the Jeeves. Yeah,
Yeah, the Jeeves are great. I'm like that with Rex Stout. Like I reread Nero Wolfe over and over again because again, it's a perfect construction of, you have this irascible detective. In many ways, my books are like that, like the irascible detective and then a go-getting, action-oriented younger person. It's just such a beautiful construct, and the world that he builds is so perfect. So I read those over and over and over again. Yeah. Don't try John Mortimer. Yeah.
Just one. What brought you to America, and why have you stayed?
Well, my mother is from Detroit, so I have dual citizenship. So I came here in '91 because I lost my job. I got fired from an advertising agency for coming to work on acid. So I don't recommend that. I thought it would be fine because it's advertising, but they didn't. They were very churlish about it, and it was like the recession at the time, and so it was easier for me to move to New York, which is what I did, and get a job in advertising that. I fled the country, and I've stayed here because I love it, and I think Americans are brilliant and funny and enthusiastic, very enthusiastic, whereas English people are very dour and sort of negative. Yeah.
So it's true. It's really true.
It's really true. It's really true. And my sister moved here, so that was one reason not to go back, because if she's here, then that's good. And I just love it. And then I married an American and had American children. So, yeah.
We don't speak English, right?
You speak English beautifully, with a very pretty accent.
We don't speak English. We speak American.
You do, but I enjoy the dialect. He's good. And like I said, I grew up with an American mother, so it feels like home to me. So hearing American accents just sounds like home. So, but I go back every so often, so they let me. So,
Any other questions?
Yes. Yeah, of course. What's your favorite kind by you?
that's a tough question to answer because I actually don't read my own genre, because if I read my own genre, I get depressed and I steal. So like everyone's like, oh, you should read Emily Henry, she's so funny. And I'm like, I don't want to read her because I'm just going to get depressed. But I'm on a science fiction kick right now. So I've been reading a lot of John Scalzi, who's a very funny science fiction writer who I like a lot. So I've read everything he's written and now I'm waiting impatiently for him to write some more. But he's very prolific, so that's fine. And then, I don't really have. And then I love the, what's her name, Jenny Lawson, who the bloggers. She's funny.
Yeah.
So Let's Pretend This Never Happened, I think is her first book. So I had to stop reading it because I was reading it at night while my kids were going to sleep, and I would laugh so hard that I would wake the baby up. So I had to put it aside. That's sort of a complete winner, that book. Really,
but God bless you're funny.
Yeah, I like funny.
You know, I like to read. I like to read to laugh. I don't read serious novels. I'm a Philistine. I don't read. And so, I mean, I go back and read Pride and Prejudice every year. You know, but she's not current. So
Not for a while.
not for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Abby, for